alibabacloud.com homepage. In the upper right-hand corner, we'll click on the console link to enter the console. From the console homepage, we'll navigate over to the ECS service and we'll try creating our very first ECS instance. So I'll click on the orange menu button here. That will cause a pop-up menu to open from the left-hand side of the screen. I'll mouse over products and services. That will also open up a drop-down menu. From here, I can search for products or pick them from the overall product list. This includes all the products. I can also sort by category. In my case, I want to find ECS. So I'll type ECS, and you can see at the top of the search results down here is Elastic Compute Service. These items up here are not from the search results. These are just pages I have recently visited. So under Elastic Computing, I'll click on Elastic Compute Service to go over to the ECS console. Now from here, this is the home page. I can see information about all of my instances. There's also a search page from which I can search for a particular instance or group of instances based on a keyword or a tag. I will click on Instances to go to my instance list. The Instances page lists all the instances in a given region. So when I move from the Overview page to Instances, you'll now see that there is a region drop-down, and I'm currently in Singapore. So let's now go ahead and create an instance for ourselves. I'll click on the Create Instance button up here in the upper right-hand corner. That will open a new tab, and from here I can choose the instance type, billing method, and region. So I'll choose pay-as-you-go rather than subscription or preemptible. I will choose pay-as-you-go because, of course, I plan to delete this instance once the demo is over. For the region, we'll choose Singapore. And Singapore has 3 zones, Zone A, Zone B, and Zone C. You can pick a particular zone, or you can click on the random button to be allocated a random zone. The instance type, you can see here that we offer both bare metal, heterogeneous, which is GPU and FPGA, and our x86 types. And then within each of these type families, there are subcategories. So in the case of x86, we have general purpose, that's the G type, compute, that's the C type, memory, that's the R type, and so on. In my case, I plan to choose an ECS.G6E.extra large, which has 4 vCPUs and 16 gigabytes of RAM for a 1:4 CPU to memory ratio as mentioned. And I just need to wait for the instance selection to load. Then I can switch this radio button to the G6E.X large. Let's give that a moment to load up. I can now select the G6E.X large. Great. I want 1 unit. I'm going to be buying 1 ECS instance, although I could create up to 128 at a time. For my disk image, I will choose Ubuntu. You can see here there's a wide variety of choices. Multiple Linux distributions are supported, including even FreeBSD. So if you want to use something that's not Linux or Windows, FreeBSD is an option. So let's go ahead and choose Ubuntu in this case. You can also see if someone else has shared an image with your account, you can use shared images. If you've created your own images, you can use a custom image, or you can pull an image from the marketplace. If I were to click that, that would take me over to the marketplace where I could choose a pre-built image. In my case, I'm just going to stick with Ubuntu 20. And I'll turn on security hardening. What that does is it installs the Alibaba Cloud Security Center tools, which will do things like detect brute force password cracking attempts and some types of backdoors and Trojans. I'll leave that turned on. Disk, because I chose a G6 Enhanced, I can only choose Enhanced SSD. So because of the instance type that I chose, I'm limited to just the fastest eSSD type. I could also attach a NAS file system, a network file system, or add up to 16 additional data disks. I won't do that. I will leave the default settings here. My system disk can be up to 500 gigabytes, but any data disks I add can be up to 32 terabytes in size. In my case, I'll leave it at the default 40 gigabytes, and I can choose either PL0 or PL1 as the eSSD storage type for my disk. I'll choose the PL0 type, which is the most affordable. It has the best price-performance ratio per gigabyte. I can also set up automatic snapshots from here, from the checkout page, which will back up my instance on a regular schedule. The default policy is once a day at 1 a.m. and the backups are kept for a week. I could also click here to create a custom policy. Let's choose the default policy and we'll back up all disks. In my case, there's only one disk to back up. Once I've confirmed that all my settings are correct, I can move on to networking. So let's go ahead and move on to the networking configuration. My network type, it will be VPC. My network type is always VPC for new instances. I need to have a VPC group already created and a vSwitch already created. If I don't have that, then the Alibaba Cloud Console will automatically put my instance into the default VPC, which is a VPC that is automatically created by Alibaba Cloud. If I want, I can go create a VPC right now. So let's do that. So I'll click on Go to the VPC console, and that will open another tab, and I can go ahead and create my own VPC, just so you can see what that process is like. So I'll click on Create VPC. I have to give my VPC a name. I'll go with Singapore VPC, and then I can choose one of the 3 default CIDR blocks, all of which are RFC 1918 private network blocks, or I can choose a custom CIDR block, which will have to be a subnet of one of these 3 blocks. It can't be a different IP address range than these 3. It has to be a subnet of one of these 3. In my case, I'll stick with default CIDR block and I'll choose this /16. That's big enough for me. I can add a description if I want. I can group resources together in the console into resource groups. In my case, I'll leave this selection here, which is the default resource group. Resource groups are just a convenient way to group Alibaba Cloud resources together per project or per RAM user. Okay, so now I need to create some vSwitches. Remember, each VPC group has to have 1 or more vSwitches, which are subnets of the VPC group's IP address range. In this case, this /16 range here. So I'll create 3 vSwitches, one for each zone in the Singapore region. And I'll name them so that I remember which zone they are in. So I'll call this one vSwitch Zone A, and I'll choose Singapore Zone A, and I'll choose a /24 subnet of my /16 up here. Then I will click the Add button to create another vSwitch, which I'll call VSW Zone B. I'll choose Zone B, and now I have to choose a non-overlapping subnet. So I'll put a 1 here. So now I have 192.168.0.0 and 192.168.1.0 as my subnets. Let's add one more. Let's add one for Zone 3. And from the Create VPC console here, you can only add 3 subnets, 3 vSwitches. However, if you go into the VPC console itself, the vSwitch list here, then you can create as many as you want. Luckily for me, 3 is enough because Singapore has exactly 3 zones. So I'll go vSwitch Zone C, and again I need a non-overlapping subnet. Great, okay, so I've done that. I click OK, and that should create my VPC and those 3 vSwitches for me. And it worked, it's done. So now I hit Complete, and I now have a Singapore VPC group. So if I close this console, if I were to close this console and go back to the Buy page and hit Refresh, I would now be able to select the Singapore VPC. And of course I can also, if I want, select a vSwitch. Maybe let's choose the Zone A vSwitch, which will cause my instance to be created in Zone A. Let's say that I want to access the internet, so I could check this box here to create a public IP address with a bandwidth up to 100 megabits per second or down to 1 megabit per second. In my case, I'm not going to assign a public IP address now because I want to show you how to use an elastic IP. So let's uncheck that box. This instance will not be given a public IP. Let's do 2 more things from the VPC console. So my instance is going to need an elastic IP, so let's go buy one. I'll click on elastic IP, and then I'll click on Create, and we'll buy ourselves an elastic IP, also pay as you go, in the Singapore region. So I need to find Singapore in my list. I will choose a bandwidth of 200 megabits per second. EIPs have a higher maximum bandwidth than traditional public IPs that you bind to an instance. And then I'll click Buy Now. So now I have an elastic IP, Well, I don't have it yet. I need to check out. I actually have to agree to the terms of service. Then I click activate, and now I have an elastic IP address. And elastic IPs are billed hourly. So in my case, I'm paying 0.6 of a cent per hour. That's US dollars, USD. I now have my EIP created. And while we're in the VPC console, maybe we can refresh and double check that that's there. And sure enough, it is. It's ready to go. And I'll be able to attach it to an ECS instance later. This is the public IP address that I have just purchased. I now need a security group. Remember, every instance must be a member of one security group. I can either have the system create a security group for me with some simple default rules, like say to allow port 22 or port 80. I can check and uncheck these boxes to decide what traffic is allowed in, or I can click create a security group to go create my own custom rules. So maybe let's do that. I'll click on create a security group, and that will take me over to the security group portion of the ECS console. That's down here under network and security at the top. That's where security groups can be found in the ECS console. And I'll click on create security group, and we'll make a new one, and I'll call it Singapore Web SG. And I'll say this is my web server security group. And the description is optional, but it helps you remember what the group is for. There are two types of security groups, basic and advanced. If you click on this info button here, if you mouse over that, over the little blue eye, you'll see that basic groups are just simple stateful virtual firewalls to put in front of your ECS instances, whereas advanced groups are sort of super high security groups that are designed for enterprises. They have much stricter deny all security policy associated with them. I don't need that, so in my case I will choose basic security group, and I want to attach it to my Singapore VPC, so I choose that from the VPC dropdown. These are the default rules for the web server Linux group type, which is the template I chose. Let's go with those rules for now, and we'll change them a little bit in a moment. So I'll click OK, and then I'll click on Create Rules. That will take me over to the inbound and outbound rule settings. Currently, we allow all outbound traffic by default, so I don't need to add any rules there. We're just allowing everything out, and we allow ping, SSH, HTTPS, and HTTP in. What I'm going to do in the demo today will not require HTTPS, so I'll go ahead and delete that rule. I'll click OK. Now I only have 3 rules, one to allow ping or ICMP traffic, one to allow SSH traffic, and one to allow web traffic on port 80 from any IP address, so from anywhere. And now my security group is also ready to go. I can now close the VPC console and the security group page in the ECS console and go back to the buy page. And here I can click on reselect security group to select my Singapore Web SG. I'll do that, and then I'll click select. Now I have selected a security group for my instance. This is where I configure my Elastic Network Interfaces, or ENIs. I can choose whether or not to release them with the instance and whether or not to auto-assign an IP. Your first ENI, and every ECS has at least one, doesn't allow you to adjust these settings. The instance must have an IP address on its first ENI, and the ENI must be released with the instance. But if I add additional ENIs, then sometimes I'm able to adjust these settings. Let's not do that though. One ENI is enough. And if you want, you can enable IPv6 on some instances in some Alibaba Cloud regions. So I'll click on Next to go over to System Configurations. So from here, I set up my host name. I set up a human readable name for my instance, and then I can set up a key pair or a password. So let's do all of that. I will not use an SSH key pair for the demo. I will simply use a password. So let me go ahead and choose a simple password here and just type it directly in. And that's how we'll log into the instance. In production, you should not do that. So in production, you should definitely use an SSH key pair. But when you're in a testing environment, you might be able to get away with using a password that you come up with yourself. Excuse me a moment, I have to wait for the page to reload. There we go. And then we'll confirm our password. So I'll click on the confirm password dialog. And then once we've put in our new confirmed password, once we've double checked that it is correct, then we can move on to naming our instance. Whoops, sorry, the drop-down menus here for auto-choosing a password from my Chrome autocomplete history are getting in the way of my typing. Give me just a moment to finish typing this all in. Okay, so we were able to set a password. Let's now go ahead and give this instance a name. I'll just call it Web Server SG. So it's my web server in Singapore, so I'll call it Web Server SG, and then we'll choose a similar host name so that when I'm logged into the instance, I remember which one it is. Typically, this is better than using the generic host name, which is going to be the instance's Alibaba Cloud ID number, which is not very memorable. So we'll choose an instance name, and then we'll choose a host name that matches the instance name. They don't have to match. I just find it convenient. That way when I'm switching between the terminal and the console, I know which is which. So let me type in the host name, Web Server SG. And then there's a few settings down here. You can add a sequential suffix to the end of each instance's name and host name. That way if you're creating instances in a group or batch, they don't all end up with identical names. So if I were to check that box, then this would be Web Server SG1, and the next instance created would be Web Server SG2, and so on. It's also possible to check this box at the bottom here to turn on what we call release protection. If you turn on release protection, then you will not be able to accidentally delete the instance from the instance overview page in the ECS console. If you try to delete it from there by clicking the release button, you'll receive an error or warning message, and you'll have to go into the instance settings and disable release protection first before you're able to delete. So that's just a safety feature. There's also this advanced setting here under at the very bottom. If I click on show, I can assign what's called a RAM role to this instance, and I can paste in some user data. So if I wanted, I could write a script here. So for instance, I could do something like, I could write a small shell script and then paste it in here to do something like create a web server for me. So maybe I'd run some commands to fetch Ubuntu package updates and then install Nginx or Apache 2. I'll skip that though. I don't need to assign a RAM role or set up any user data, so we can just move on to the next section, grouping. So I'll click on grouping, and that will take me over to the grouping page. So this has nothing to do with the configuration of the single ECS instance itself. This is where I can do things like determine which resource group or deployment set the instance should be in, or how it should be tagged. So this is just to help me keep track of the instance, especially if I have multiple instances. It's a good idea to tag the instance based on which team is paying for it, or maybe what project it's part of, or what environment it's part of, dev, staging, or test. I can keep track of that by using tags. I won't add any tags for this demo, but you can add up to 20 tags from this page. And then resource group. Let me show you what a resource group is. So a resource group is a container or set of resources within an Alibaba Cloud account. Again, the resource group is just a way to group resources together to better manage and keep track of them. A deployment set is a way to make sure that the instances are running on or near the same, or are assigned to different physical servers. So actually the deployment set's role is to make sure that your instances don't end up on the same physical server in the Alibaba Cloud Data Center to avoid hardware failure. So this is a way to get even more reliability for your instances within the same zone. If you put them in a deployment set, they'll be scheduled so that they're not all running on the same physical machine. If you have a dedicated host, which is a special dedicated physical server that you have purchased, you can make sure your ECS instances all get launched together on that physical host from the dedicated host settings here, which is a great way to ensure that your VMs are in an isolated environment separate from other customers, and it also ensures very high intercommunication performance between those ECS instances. And then you can also create what's called a private pool, but we won't go into detail about that in this class. You can just know that you have this feature available. I'll click on preview to move on to the preview page. From the preview page, we can double check our billing method, the number of instances we'll be purchasing, the region, the image, which is the operating system type and version. We can see the instance type is a enhanced general purpose generation 6, four vCPU cores, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and we can see that the system disk is an enhanced SSD, 40 gigabytes in size, and it has automatic daily snapshotting turned on. I can see the network type is VPC. I can see which VPC and vSwitch the instance will be attached to, and which security group or security groups it is attached to. And then I can see the login type, which is password, the instance name, and the instance host name. If I wanted, I could then save all of this instance configuration I've done as a launch template, which I can then use to create other instances, or as a ROS template, which can be, again, used to create a resource stack just like this one, to clone the entire configuration. And if I click View Open API, I can see what API call I would have to make in Java or Python or other languages in order to create this instance programmatically. There's also the option to turn on automatic release. This will delete the instance automatically after a given period of time has passed. I will turn that on just in case I forget to delete this instance after the demo. Finally, I agree to the terms of service, and then I click Create Instance to go ahead and start my instance running. So now that I've clicked that, I can actually close this tab and go back to the ECS instances list for Singapore inside the ECS console. And if I click Refresh, I can now see that I have an instance starting up. So now might be a good time to attach our Elastic IP to this instance so that once it boots up, I can access it via SSH over the internet. So I'll go down to Network and Security, and there are two hyperlinks here, one to the VPC console and one directly to EIPs within the VPC console. I'll choose that one. That will open up a new tab, which is just a shortcut to the VPC console itself. And here's the Elastic IP address section. I can see my EIP, and then I can bind this EIP to some other service. So let's check the box next to our EIP, and let's go ahead and attach it to something. Actually, first I need to release it. It looks like it might be attached to something right now. So we'll go ahead and release. I shouldn't have done that. I should have clicked on bind, excuse me. That's okay, that just means we need to buy another EIP. So I'll just go back and buy the EIP again. It was pay as you go, so I can easily replicate those steps. Again, we'll choose a 200 megabit per second bandwidth, and then I'll buy and activate just like I did before. Our release will actually delete the Elastic IP, so I should not have done that. Unbind is what you do to remove an Elastic IP from an ECS instance. Release will actually delete the Elastic IP, so do be careful with those buttons in the console, otherwise you might do what I did and accidentally delete your Elastic IP, and of course once you did that, there's no way to get it back. Okay, I'll refresh. Here is my EIP. Great. I want to go here and click on More. Actually, let's double click on the EIP itself, go to the EIP list, and then click on Bind Resource. I want to attach the EIP to something. So you can see again, how did I do that? From the EIP section in the VPC console, I clicked on the Elastic IP's ID number, and I went to Bind Resource. And I can choose to attach it to a secondary ENI on an Alibaba Cloud instance, an ECS instance itself, a server load balancer, or a NAT gateway. I will choose ECS instance. We'll use a normal binding, and I will choose this instance that I just created, web server ST, and then I'll click OK. And now the Elastic IP is bound to that ECS instance. So if I go back into the ECS console and I refresh, I should now see two IP addresses here. One is the private internal IP within the VPC group, and one is that Elastic IP that I just attached. So let's go ahead and copy that to the clipboard, and I'll start up a console. And we'll go ahead and log into that instance using our password. Let's see what happens. Whoops, I typed the password wrong. Let's try again. Okay, we're now logged in, and because we have an internet connection, I can do things like run apt update. So let's go ahead and run an update and then install Apache, and then we'll see if we can access this instance over port 80. So I'll install Apache 2. I'll say yes. Once it's installed, we'll make ourselves a little website, and then we'll try accessing that website from Chrome over the internet. Okay, so Apache's installed. we need to enable it, so if the instance reboots, it will continue running. And then we can go to var www HTML, and we can make a new index.html. We'll delete the test page, and we'll make our own. So I'll use Vim to set myself up a new page. So we'll do something simple because I need to do it from memory, so I'm not going to get too fancy here. I'll just do something very simple. I'll make a page that says, "Welcome to Alibaba Cloud," and then I will go ahead and save that. And now if I were to copy this IP address again and open a new tab, whoops, I should be able to go over there. And sure enough, it loads right away and it says, "Welcome to Alibaba Cloud." So we can see that it is working and serving requests on port 80. Now our security group rules also allow us to send ICMP traffic. So we should be able to ping this instance too. So let's take a look at our security group rules here. Here they are. Let's try to ping the instance. So I'll log out and we'll try to ping this IP address and we'll see what happens. And you can see it's working. And now let's see something neat. So I'll leave this ping running in the background and we'll come back to it in a moment. I'm going to delete this rule. So I'll delete the rule that allows ICMP traffic. Now we only allow port 80 and port 22. And sure enough, you can see that our ping has started to fail. The security group is not allowing this traffic through. It's dropping it, so we're getting request timeouts. If I add the rule back in, again, leaving the ping running in the background, then we should once again start seeing that ping succeed. So again, I'll allow traffic from anywhere, and I'll click OK. And now I've added the rule back in. If I go back to my console, after a few moments, we can see that once again, ping is starting to succeed. So the security group does cause an almost immediate effect. It takes effect in near real time. Okay, we'll stop the ping. And now we finished testing out our security group. So another thing we can do is take snapshots. So let's make a copy of our ECS instance. In fact, just to see what will happen, let's go ahead and make a snapshot of our ECS instance and then unbind our Elastic IP, create a new instance, boot from the snapshot, and bind the Elastic IP to the new instance. This will be effectively migrating everything. And what we'll do is we'll actually move our instance into zone B, just to sort of simulate migrating to another zone. So I need to take a snapshot of my instance. So I can click on the instance ID. Let me do that again so you can see it. I click on the instance ID from the instances list. I go to disks, and from here, there is a create snapshot button next to each of my disks. In my case, I only have one. I'll click on create snapshot and I'll call it web server SG, and I'll put in a date so that I remember when this was created, and I'll click on create, and now the snapshot creation process has started. If I go over here to snapshots, I can actually see that this has started, and now we just need to wait a few moments for it to finish. Because this is the first snapshot, we do need to make a full copy of the disk, so this could take a little while because we need to copy all 40 gigabytes. Alright, so after patiently waiting about 5 minutes, the snapshot is done. We're not quite done though, because now we need to create an image. So a snapshot is a backup that you can use to restore back onto the disk that created the snapshot. But if you want to use the snapshot to create or boot new ECS instances, you have to first convert it into a custom image. So there's a button here, Create Custom Image, that does just that. So I'll click on Create Custom Image, and now I'm going to create a bootable image from this snapshot, which I'll call, I don't know, Web Server Golden Image. And again, I'll put a date on here so I remember when I did this. Apache 2 plus static website application code, HTML, for my site. And again, I can choose a resource group and I can add some tags, but I won't. I'm just going to use this one image. And actually, if you want, your images can include data disk snapshots of other disks. I'm not going to do that, but if you had a ECS configured in a way where in addition to the system disk that you boot from, you also wanted to be able to pull in some data when you created new instances, you could add data disk snapshots down here that included that data. I won't do that. I will just click Create to create my system disk custom image. And now that's done. And if I were to go back to the ECS console page, I can go down to Images under the Instances and Images menu, and sure enough, here is the image I just created. Creating an image is basically instantaneous because unlike creating a snapshot, I'm not actually making a copy of anything. I'm simply marking my snapshot as bootable. So this should happen right away. So now we can go ahead and create new instances from this snapshot. So let's do that. So we'll close the VPC console page and we'll close our website. And let's start actually by simulating a failure. So what I'm going to do is stop my instance. And then we'll create a new instance in a new zone to take its place. Remember, snapshots, disk images, and elastic IPs are not bound to a single zone. ECS instances can't move between zones, but elastic IPs and images can. So I'll choose to shut this instance down, and then we'll go ahead and try and visit our website again after it's shut down. And then we'll create a new instance to take the place of this quote-unquote failed instance. So let's wait a moment. Okay, it's stopped. Now if I were to try to visit my website, it would fail. Sure enough, I can't get there. You can see that it's not working. It's just I'm waiting and waiting forever. I'm not going to be able to get to that page. So how are we going to fix things? Let's create a new instance, and then we'll move this EIP over to the new instance. So I'll click on Create Instance again, and we'll quickly go through all the steps we went through before. So I'll choose the pay-as-you-go type, and this time I'll choose a different zone. We'll put our instance in zone B. I'll choose the same instance type and family. I'll just put it in a different zone. So here we are. I've selected zone B. Again, we'll use a Gen 6E extra large. I will choose this time a custom image. So let's go ahead and choose a custom image here. Okay, custom image. I should only have one. It's my web server golden image. I'll leave the system disk settings alone. We will set up again a automatic snapshot policy for our new instance. Okay, we've selected our snapshot policy. Networking, same as before. I will not assign a public IP. We're going to move our elastic IP over. I will leave the vSwitch and VPC settings here. Again, we'll use the same VPC, just a different zone, zone B this time. Security group, we'll use Singapore Web SG like before. We'll have one elastic network interface. Under system configuration, I can skip the password step this time. I can inherit that from the image, so I don't need to set that. But I do need to give this thing a name. Maybe maybe Web SG new. Okay, and I won't make any changes to the host name. I won't add any suffixes. Next, we'll go to grouping. Again, I'll leave all of those settings alone and move on to the preview. And it looks okay. Singapore Zone B this time, pay as you go, one ECS, using our custom image, and it's a G6 enhanced X large, just like our previous instance was. And I'll set it up to release itself automatically, and I'll agree to the terms of service, and then I'll click create, and that will create a new instance. And now I can close this tab, and from the console we can now see that I have two instances. Let's refresh that again. One of them is stopped, one of them is starting up. So one of the first things I want to do is take this elastic IP off of my failed instance and put it back on my new instance that I've created from my image. So again, let's just double confirm that currently with my instance disabled, with my old instance shut down, I cannot get to the website. Then we'll move this IP over to our new active instance, and things should start working again. So I'll go over to the EIP console again. We'll open a new tab, and I'll unbind the elastic IP from its current instance and bind it to a new one. So I'll click unbind. Again, remember to click unbind and not release. Then I will go ahead and click on the elastic IP, click on bind resource, choose ECS instance as before, and this time we'll bind it to our new web server, so the one that's running. I'll click OK, and the binding process is complete. This IP is now attached to our new instance in Zone B. If I go back and refresh, you can see the IP is moved up to our new instance in Zone B. Our Zone A instance is still sitting here turned off. And just to dramatically demonstrate how unimportant the original instance is to the custom image we just created, I can release this, and that won't have any effect at all on our ability to use that custom image we created. The instance image is not in any way bound to the instance that created the image. Okay, so our new instance now has the EIP bound to it. I should be able to copy paste that into a browser, and look at that, our site is back up in a new zone. So everything worked as planned. Thank you for joining me for the demo.